Tonight on WVW Broadcast Network News, my guest is a former chief of police of a major city right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. He's an expert on Islam. He's training law enforcement officials across America and warning them that America is under siege. That we have been.
Good evening and welcome to an ongoing webinar series. We're going to continue these Tuesday nights. You're watching Brannon Howse in his studio as he interviews David Boris. David is on camera with us. Good evening, David.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
And David, of course, is a co-founder and the catalyst behind the entire Sharia Crime Stoppers effort. He's developed all the course material. Some of you may have seen the webinar series in the fall. Well, this is an opportunity tonight to have Brannon Howse do an extensive interview with David. At the conclusion of the pre-recorded interview, which will show in its entirety, both Brannon will be with us live, David will be with us live. Remember, you can ask your questions by hitting the Q&A button and typing in your questions. We'll see them, we'll distribute them to David and Brannon and get them answered. So, by the way, we want to thank you. We are continuing this webinar series. Why? Because you brought us a large audience. The Enemies Within the Church was such a big hit that we're continuing these webinars. These webinars will be the enemies within. 1 week it might be the enemies within the church, but there's plenty of other enemies to talk about, the enemies in the deep state, the enemies frankly in the country to our north, Canada, and so on. So the Enemies Within series will continue. Periodically, we will continue with the Enemies Within the Church. The next episode of the Enemies Within the Church will actually be 2 weeks from tonight. We'll talk about that at the end. For now, please sit back and watch the interview in its entirety and get your questions by pushing the Q&A button and letting us know what your questions are.
Under siege, that we have been penetrated by a group of people and an ideology that desires to bring down America. And he'll warn us about terrorist training camps throughout America, as well as what is really going on in the mosques of America, who funds them, controls them, and what's the ideology being taught inside those mosques. WVW Broadcast Network News begins right now.
This is WVW Broadcast Network News and Commentary with Brannon Howse.
Welcome to the program. Glad you are with us. My guest tonight, as I said, is a former chief of police. His name is David Boris, and he also works with the United West and our friend over there, Tom Trento. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're quite welcome, Brandon. It's a pleasure.
All right, David, tell us a little bit about yourself. Other than being a chief of police, you were also a sheriff deputy in the administration of a sheriff deputy department for many years as well, were you not?
That's right. I was a member of the command staff of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office for 16 years, following my retirement from the United States military in 1991. I left the Army with my wife in 1991 and thereafter joined local law enforcement in Georgia, and then was fortunate to be selected as the chief of police for the city of Woodstock, a suburb of Georgia located north of Atlanta.
So when did you become interested in Islam?
Well, the first warning shot, if you will, certainly for all of us, was the 9/11 attack, but we were told, if you recall, immediately after that Islam was a religion of peace, that the hijackers, the attackers of that terrible event had nothing to do with Islam. So like so many others, I hit the snooze button and wasn't too concerned, even though there were plenty of attacks going on all around the world. Thank God that didn't have to worry too much, because George W. Bush, if you remember, assured us that Islam was peaceful. My wake-up call goes back to the Fort Hood attack. If you remember, right after that attack, it was labeled a workplace violence attack, if you will, or event. Had nothing to do with Islam. So I didn't think that that was accurate, so I started studying on my own, read some books, and found out that the threat is much worse than I ever thought or imagined.
Well, let's talk about these mosques. How many of these mosques are in the U.S.? Who's funding them, and what's the ideology being taught in them?
Well, there's about 3,000 mosques now, or more in the United States. They're growing by leaps and bounds. The goal of the Muslim Brotherhood is to have a mosque in every major city throughout our country. The funding comes from Wahhabi religious sect in Saudi Arabia, and their ideology is rooted in Salafism, which means the return of Islam to its original roots as propagated by Muhammad between the years 610 and 632 when he finally died.
And so what kind of ideology have you found? What literature have you found in mosque, and what are they teaching the folks in those mosques?
Well, the literature was written by Islamic scholars who were propagating the same form of Islam that Muhammad was. Sayyid Qutb is one of the major ones. He is the godfather of the jihadist movement, the contemporary jihadist movement, who was originally an Egyptian school teacher, but he became radicalized into the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt during the late 1940s, early 1950s. He was imprisoned in Egypt and eventually died in prison, but not before he wrote the Jihadist Manifesto in Milestones. Milestones is a book written by, as I said, Sayyid Qutb, that lays out the step-by-step takeover and the adoption of Salafism and how Islam must dominate, must take over the world to impose Sharia law over mankind.
And of course, Sayyid Qutb is one of the guys that was promoting Muslim Brotherhood's concept of interfaith dialogue here in America, and said that it is a one-way bridge to bring the non-Muslim to their side, not the other way around. And so we see interfaith dialogue not only being done by churches and religious useful idiots like James White with Yasser Qadi right here in town, but police departments and sheriff departments are doing interfaith dialogue, correct?
That's right. Absolutely.
I mean, why on earth would a police department or sheriff department do interfaith dialogue?
Well, they do it because they're afraid of the pushback if they have any training that talks about this threat. So they bow to it, they cater to it, and they submit to it. And they don't allow the training to come into their departments because they're absolutely petrified of the pushback that will happen, as happened to John Guandolo and myself and others who have tried to be forthright and train law enforcement officers of what is going to happen or what is happening in our communities. Well,
what happened, I mean, again, you're former chief of police in Woodstock, Georgia. You then move into this line of work, training law enforcement as a former law enforcement official for many years at the sheriff's department administrative level, then a chief of police a police department. And you tried doing this in your own state. What happened to you?
Well, in March of 2018, I was scheduled to teach a class, an 8-hour class for the Barrow County, Georgia Sheriff's Office. And as soon as CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, got wind of that, they immediately went on an offensive, labeling me as an Islamophobe and not qualified to teach the class, trying to pressure the sheriffs into not hosting the class. Fortunately, the sheriff stood firm and allowed the training to go forward. After considerable public pressure for him to submit to the Muslim Brotherhood and not do so. But he did. He showed a great deal of courage and allowed the training. We had 58 students in the class. The vast majority were law enforcement. There were some civilians in the class. And the Muslim Brotherhood lost that particular round because the sheriff was able to stand firm.
Yet there was a push even from the governor's office against you, right?
The governor's office also got wind of it and was afraid of the political pushback and didn't want to grant training credit to the police officers who took the training. Fortunately, the powers that be were able to get the credit for the officers, and it took several months after the class before the training was actually approved for their credit, counting towards their annual training requirements.
And so you're having a harder time, like John Guandolo and others, you're having a harder time getting into these police departments and sheriff departments to train them, correct?
Well, I think that the police departments, again, are reluctant to host this type of training because they know if it goes public, there will be a great deal of pushback. And most police chiefs work for political officials, and they too do not want their city or town raked over the coals with adverse publicity. So it's quite easy to take the path of least resistance and not take the training at all.
And so to get around this, one of the things we've done is brought him into our TV studio. He's recorded 4 one-hour shows from our news desk, just giving the briefing with a PowerPoint that we're putting online for you then to share with your law enforcement officials, local community members, and hopes that we can go around them, correct?
That's correct.
We also will let you know tonight, if you grab a pen and paper, you can go to a website and you can bring David to your community. If your local law enforcement community does not have the courage to train your local law enforcement against this real, clear, and present threat to America and to your community, then maybe you could do it. Maybe you could organize some police officers, sheriff deputies, city council members, other business people in town, invite them into your home, invite them into your living room. Maybe if you're a pastor of a church and you have the courage, maybe do this in your fellowship hall of your church. But certainly, we're increasingly finding even the churches are folding. And so it's up to us, the citizens. Bring David into your home, into your living room, invite the key officials, as I said, from police officers to sheriff deputies to city council members, businessmen, maybe some religious leaders that would have the courage to show up, and let him conduct his training on a Friday evening or Saturday evening, or maybe all day Saturday, whatever you work out with him, and he'll do that right in your living room. And the website is theunitedwest.org/Sharia Crime Stoppers. theunitedwest.org/Sharia Crime Stoppers. Correct?
And one more point that you have to understand is I do not charge for the training. I do need some help with expenses though, but I don't charge for the training. So hopefully that will help satisfy anybody that would like to host this type of training.
So when you say expenses, maybe some travel and then lodging.
That's
so
right.
a very minimal cost.
That's right.
All right. I know there are some of you out there, you're blessed, you have a good job, you have a successful business, and certainly if a group of you got together, you could certainly cover his travel and lodging and do this in your home. Some of you have a great room, a good-sized living room, good-sized basements in certain parts of the country where you could easily host this. So again, we've had to go around the churches largely over the years because they didn't have the courage to host us starting in about 2008. Those that had the courage to host us generally couldn't hold the crowd. Like we consistently had 1,500 to 1,800 in Minneapolis. A lot of the big churches would not host us because they got big by catering to all the latest fad and political correctness. The smaller churches that would host us, well, they only would seat 200-300, so they can't host an event that's going to have 1,500 to 1,800 people. But increasingly, we have found, again, we've had to go around the churches because of the nature of this topic. Well, now we're having to sadly go around many of our police departments and sheriff departments. So it's up to the citizens once again. So I hope you'll take this seriously and go to theunitedwest.org/Sharia Crime Stoppers. Let's talk about what's taught in some of these mosques. You've seen the literature. What are they saying about America, Americans, and what are they asking for these Muslims in these mosques to be trained in and believe?
Well, they're very anti-Semitic, they're anti-Jew, and they're anti-Christian. It's a religion of dominance, so this is being perpetrated, as well as jihad. Jihad, you have to remember, is a form of religious expression. So when they talk about jihad, they're not referring to terrorism at all. It is a form of religious expression, obedience to their God, Allah. So they're promoting this concept. And this is why mosques are considered incubators for radicalization, because young second and third generation Muslim men, mostly, some women, and recent converts to Islam are buying into this perverted ideology of violence as a form of religious expression. To do what? To establish Sharia law over mankind, to establish Sharia law on behalf of Allah, and that's when there will be finally peace in the world. It's another utopian attempt to bring paradise, peace to the United States and the world.
And there are different kinds of jihad. So some of this is civilizational jihad, where they run for office, and now in 2018 we see all up and down from the local, state, federal level hundreds of Islamists elected to office. So there's this civilizational jihad, but then there's the violent jihad. There's also financial jihad, where they fund it with their zakat, and or where businesses, Saudi Arabia came over here with a bunch of money, invested in American businesses, but the American businesses have to give a percentage of their profits to the Islamic Sharia finance organizations that they tell them to, and then those organizations, those Sharia financial organizations, give it to the really jihadi groups that are funding real jihad or violent jihad all over the world. So what we're seeing is a civilizational jihad and a violent jihad. While some of them are going from these mosques and performing violent jihad in the name of ISIS, like in the terrorist attack of October 31st, 2017 in Manhattan with a truck attack and knife attack, we see not so much of that yet. We see more of the civilizational jihad, correct?
We certainly see that. And to get back to that particular attack that Brannon just talked about, there was a very fundamentalist mosque connected to that perpetrator that was preaching anti-Semitism, death to homosexuals, and it was well known to the mayor of New York City. He was warned by another imam that there was radicalization in this particular mosque. It was ignored, even though the police department, even several years prior, had this mosque under surveillance because it too was concerned. But Mayor de Blasio canceled that surveillance, did not heed the warnings, and we had the attack.
Now, you talk about an imam warning the police about another mosque. It's too radical. Now we get into what we commonly know as the Hegelian dialectic process, pitting opposites against each other, creating conflict, managing the crisis, and not letting a good crisis go to waste, and then using the crisis to further their agenda. I have to wonder if one reason we haven't seen a lot more violent jihadi attacks in America is because they're being told by their handlers to stand down for right now. We're making progress in the civilizational jihad by getting our people elected to office at the state, local, and federal level, and we will take over with a revolution from within. Kind of like Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School, who said, the old way of revolution with guns and bullets is old-fashioned. The new way is a diffused and dispersed disintegration of the system. We'll have what Italian communist Antonio Gramsci called the long march through the institutions. We'll take over the power centers of education and media and government and religion. And I think many of the Islamists are being controlled and funded and trained by the Marxists, that red-green axis, including, I think, a lot of training coming out of Russia and the Kremlin, as Jeff Nyquist and others have written about, and former KGB agents have testified to in their own books and interviews with people like Jeff Nyquist and others. So I think they're learning. The Islamists have learned a lot from the Marxists in this red-green axis. So they don't want a lot of terrorist attacks in America right now, because that would have maybe slow things down in Europe and other places. And once they get an upper hand here in America and have the upper house, then they can start doing more of these things. So the occasional terrorist attack, however, can be used to their advantage. The imam says to the folks in New York, you got a radical mosque over there, you better look out for that. They don't really listen. A guy pledges allegiance to ISIS, carries out the attack in Manhattan with the truck in October of 31st, 2017. Now this imam can say, I told you so, I tried to warn you. Now what that does is causes the officials to look to them, Muslim Brotherhood, mosques, funded, many of them, and established by Saudi Arabia, of which was also behind 9/11, according to many experts. Now they are seen as the people to be trusted, to give them more positions, more counsel comes from them, listen to them, help them, defend them, because they're the good guys. These are ISIS guys, are the radicals. These are the good Muslims. But it's really Muslim Brotherhood that goes all the way back to Hamas, the terrorist organization. It goes all the way back to their founder, al-Husseini, which goes all the way back to the Grand Mufti of Palestine, al-Husseini, who worked with Adolf Hitler to carry out the slaughter of 6 million Jews, 5 million non-Jews. But now they're seen as the good guys who are warning about the bad guys. So don't worry about Muslim Brotherhood. We'll help you. And that's now letting the fox in the hen house. So in other words, Muslim Brotherhood capitalizes on the terrorist attacks in order to gain more favor. Correct?
And they also capitalize on one other thing. Remember the red-green axis. The progressives and the Marxists are very active right now at constantly committing chaos throughout our political and social environment. And this distracts us from what the Muslim Brotherhood is doing behind the scenes. So all of this distraction is helping further the Muslim Brotherhood cause. So while we are distracted on the one hand, it's another sleight of hand. While we're distracted over here, they're active over here, subverting our Constitution. They're keeping their eye on the ball. They're going to try to subvert us without firing a shot. They've written about it. They've explained it. Just look at the Quranic concept of war that was published by a Pakistani general, endorsed by the Pakistan Chief of Staff several years ago, that lays out the importance of preparation for battle. And if you do your preparation properly, you may never have to fire a shot. And that's what they're up to.
And one of the things they're doing, as we see, is working with Republicans and Democrats on hate crime legislation. Laws that keep us from speaking truth about Islam. Laws, again, going back a few years that we've written about, we've warned about, that Usama Dakdok and Sharam Hadian have been warning about, that the Republicans and Democrats are working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., with Muslim Brotherhood to deal with people like you and me and others that are speaking truth about Islam, that we would be labeled as being involved in hate speech, offending the Prophet, and therefore could be penalized and certainly kicked off terrestrial radio and regular television, but even bringing crimes against us, penalizing us, and using that as justification then to completely scrub us from the World Wide Web. Muslim Brotherhood is behind these kind of pieces of legislation, correct?
That's correct. And recently an imam published a list of words on his website that he considers Islamophobic. Jihad, jihadist, and others are words that he does not want removed from the public dialogue because they're going to be considered as Islamophobic or hate speech, just like Brannon indicated. Once this happens, we're going to shut down all speech, all warnings about this threat. What about our Second Amendment rights? How are the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamists, the Green of the Red-Green Axis working with the Marxists and members of Congress to destroy at the state and federal level our right to keep and bear arms per the Second Amendment? Well, just look at the people that are most vocal about limiting your Second Amendment rights. It's the Marxists, it's the progressives, it's the wing of the Democratic Party that has been totally taken over by this far leftist movement to take away your Second Amendment rights. They're constantly trying to whittle away and chip away at our rights to bear arms and protect ourselves. It's going to be the law-abiding citizens that will comply with any laws concerning the Second Amendment. And once that they become limited, we will become disarmed, and then the eventual takeover will take place. And the Islamists have joined in on sponsoring or promoting and pushing this kind of legislation, right? Oh, absolutely. In fact, the Islamists are behind some of the sanctuary city movements. In California, for example, the Muslim Public Affairs Council was the one that joined forces to get sanctuary cities and the sanctuary state established in California. So they're behind all of these movements. How about on the border? No wall, open borders is all being propagated by this alliance of the far left, the Marxists, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood. So deprive us of our religious freedom, our freedom of speech, our religious freedom, our Second Amendment rights, open border, no sovereignty, no national security, sanctuary cities, so you can allow an invading army to literally come in and take up residence legally inside of major American cities. And then once you have deprived the truth tellers, those lifting up a shout of warning from speaking, or the American citizens from owning guns or limiting their access to guns or just outright taking them, this invading army of the red-green axis has us with a boot on our throat. We're done. And just remember, we have people in the Republican Party as well that are not looking after our interests. Paul Ryan himself did not support any kind of border wall, even though funding was originally passed and given for the border wall. He drug his feet on it, didn't get it put in place. He totally sabotaged our current president. So there are others as well the former National Security Advisor, General McMaster, he purged the National Security Council of those people who were trying to warn our president about this alliance. In particular, Rich Higgins was fired because of a memo he wrote trying to warn our president about this red-green Marxist axis. And he was fired by our general officer, McMaster, because he didn't want him anymore in the National Security Council.
And McMaster being, you know, his title there was what? Is the National Security Advisor, right?
That's correct.
He was head of that. And he didn't like what Rich Higgins put out. Fabulous 6-7 page report.
That's correct.
Fabulous. Warning about the Frankfurt School, cultural Marxism, Herbert Marcuse, a lot of things I wrote about in Grave Influence in 2008, 2009. He was warning about in that paper to President Trump. McMaster didn't like it. But McMaster is also, as the head of the National Security Council before John Bolton, McMaster didn't see Islam as a threat, did he?
No, he did not. He, as many military leaders don't want it labeled and are very comfortable accepting countering violent extremism as the way that this type of threat training is given now in the United States military. It's been watered down, it's politically correct, and it's subservient to the Muslim Brotherhood, because they're the ones that created the countering violent extremism narrative. It came from the Muslim Brotherhood.
How has it gone historically in Germany when they took away all the weapons of the Jews? How did that end? I think we all know it's a rhetorical question, but when the Muslims came in there and worked with Albana and Hitler, I mean, the Jews had no way of fight back, did they? Absolutely.
We saw what happened once the population was armed and defenseless. It was just a matter of time before they were taken over, and it happened very quickly.
And in so many ways, we're seeing history repeat itself. The National Socialist Workers' Party, the Nazi Party, socialist, working with the Islamists, that red-green axis there in Nazi Germany, depriving people of their Second Amendment, religious discrimination, then, of course, depriving people of their civil liberties, Jews and Christians, and then anti-Semitism. All of it seems to be repeating itself, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what history does. If you remember back prior to World War II, who was the biggest warner, if you will? Who was waving the caution flags, the red flags that we had to be on guard? It was Winston Churchill. And you saw how he was rebuffed, constantly rebuffed. His warnings were not heeded, and yet all of his warnings came to pass.
Yeah, then they turned to him to have them...
To bail him out.
Yeah, bail him out.
And then they threw him out.
Exactly right. All right, my guest is David Boris, and again, his website, theunitedwest.org/Sharia Crime Stoppers, and it's been flashing up on the screen throughout the program. How many terrorists... So we're under siege. Let me just ask you this question. We're producing this docu-movie, Siege, following up our docu-movie, Sabotage. Of course, you can watch Sabotage the first hour for free at sabotagethemovie.com, sabotagethemovie.com. By the way, you've seen it?
Mm-hmm. I have.
You care to...
Excellent.
Is it?
Oh, yes. Fast-paced, very informative, 6 sections, and the last one will really open your eyes of how our religious establishment has totally been penetrated and compromised by this threat. I recommend it highly as a way to very quickly understand the entire scope of what this threat is.
Well, thank you for that. And by the way, the last hour on Marxianity exposes several well-known Bible teachers and religious leaders that might shock many of you, but also exposes some guys, some quote pastors, that are working to take away our Second Amendment rights. So these are pastors that have actively organized an organization and using twisted scripture to deprive us of our Second Amendment rights. So you have these useful idiot pastors doing the bidding of the Marxists and the Muslims and sabotaging our own country.
So it's a done deal.
Yeah. So we're filming now, obviously, many interviews, and you're part of it, for the next docu-movie, Siege. The clear and present dangers facing America and the persecution that is coming via a red-green axis to Christians, conservatives, and Jews, and a false church. Are we under siege? Is there a clear and present danger? And what are some of those clear and present dangers as far as your expertise?
Well, I think that this siege actually started years and years and years ago. Remember, the Muslim Brotherhood initially came here in 1962, 1963 at the University of Illinois at Urbana, where it formed the Muslim Student Association. Since then, They've installed a series of front groups throughout the United States, a network of Muslim Brotherhood followers, supporters, friends, if you will, plus the alliance of the red axis, the Marxists, the social Marxists, the Democrats, the liberals, have formed an axis to subvert our Constitution, and they've been totally open about what they intend to do. All you have to do is read their explanatory memorandum that the FBI discovered in an archive of all of their documents. So we've known about the threat for years, and yet we still are turning our back on it. So the siege is underway, and the siege has been furthered by useful idiots, by members of both administrations, by senior officials in the military and political officials and ranking members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and other organizations who have allowed this purge of training materials to take place. Under their watch, they've allowed it. Remember, all of these officials took an oath of office, the same oath that I took and other members took, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is a domestic threat, but it's part of the global threat of Islam to conquer. And
as we see this threat, a lot of guys my age, guys younger than you, look to your experience. You were in the military for 23 years. You were in the command staff of a sheriff's department for, what, 16 years?
That's correct.
And then you were a chief of police in Woodstock, Georgia for 3 years. So I look to guys like you and I say, praise the Lord for guys like you that are now lifting up a shout. The older guys, the guys who have wisdom, who have trained, who have learned, who know law and law enforcement, who have credibility with law and law enforcement, and who have educated themselves by taking the time to study and get up on the red-green axis. And so we say, thank you, David. But we also say, aren't we thankful for all the former chief of police, retired chief of police, that are joining him and lifting up a shout and coming forward and having his back and joining him? Oh, wait a minute. That's not happening, is it?
No.
And yesterday we talked with our friend, your friend, David Valdivin, retired FBI. Again, we're looking to that generation, the older generation of retired agents with the gray hair and the experience, who were trained at a different day and a different time, and we would think would have a little more courage than the feminized young people of today. And yet the older gray-haired retired guys that many of us younger guys are counting on to lift up a shout and have our back as older guys, saying, hey, we've been there, we've done that. Listen to these guys, whether it's the younger guys or whether it's the older gentlemen who have the experience. These older gentlemen from the FBI, these older gentlemen from being former chiefs of police, they should be helping us.
And they're not.
And they're not. And yet I think that's shocking to many people, because a lot of us younger guys, and I'm increasingly becoming less younger, but younger relative to the guys that are in their 70s, you know, late 70s, early 80s, that are still very, very articulate and in great health and could be out here helping. We look to them and say, wait a minute, you're of our father's generation. We're counting on you to lift up a shout and help us and have our back. And we thought that that generation certainly would have been trained to do that and had the intestinal fortitude to do that because they had a more conservative, traditional upbringing, but they're not doing it.
Let me give you a personal example of what you were talking about. I have a former Army officer who I was fortunate enough to serve with in Germany, now retired, and when I presented him with the information about General Dempsey, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was instrumental in purging out the training of the military, General Dempsey happened to have been a classmate in West Point of this officer who I served with. And when I told this officer about what General Dempsey did, he immediately turned his back. Our friendship has been severed. He did not want to believe it, and he's ignored it. So often this is the case. People do not want to accept this. They're into denial over this threat. It's a denial that is a natural consequence when faced with a overwhelming problem, threat, if you will. Our first and natural inclination is to say, no, it's not really that bad. It will go away with time. Well, this one is that bad, and it won't go away. with time. It will only get worse.
So what you're saying is, whether it's military, whether it's the intelligence community, the FBI, the CIA, whether it's religious leaders, pastors and religious leaders, many of them are compromising, taking a strong stand because they don't want to lose friendships. They don't want to be an island. Recently, a well-known international Bible teacher sat on his church platform at what was called a Shepherd's Conference for pastors and looked at three of the biggest cultural Marxists in America that I expose in this book that came out in November 2018. November 2018 this came out, and this well-known Bible teacher in March of 2019 looked at the three men that I expose in this book who are major cultural Marxists, Mark Dever, Lincoln Duncan, and Al Mohler, and told them in front of all of these thousands of pastors, and not to count the thousands watching online, and told them, I know you're into social justice, but I'm not going to fight you. You're my friends. I'm not going to fight my friends. You've been given a special place in the kingdom of God. I don't want to be an island. So we just had a major evangelical leader cave and say, my friendships and my comfort are more important than truth. And what you're telling me is this is not only going on in the area with our Bible teachers and evangelical leaders, but military officials and law enforcement. And unlike the pastors, the military and law enforcement guys have sworn an oath to defend and protect the Constitution and our United States of America from enemies both foreign and domestic. They're violating their oath. They are, in some cases, some of them are taking part in a treasonous, subversive activity. Are they not? They're being derelict in their duty.
I dare say that's an accurate statement, if for no other reason they allowed the purge to take place. All of the training has been sanitized because the Muslim Brotherhood demanded it, and we caved to it. That's aiding and abetting our enemy. When the head of the Justice Department, when John Brennan, when he was a national security advisor to Barack Obama, and General Dempsey all weak-kneed and went along with the directive to purge it out because the Muslim Brotherhood demanded that it be done. That is treasonous in my estimation. That is turning your back against the oath of office. Just think what would have happened if one general officer who was already eligible to retirement, he was a 4-star general, had said, no, I'm not going to do that. One general officer stood firm. And if he was fired, then went public about it. But no, he did not do that. He folded, he caved, he went along with it. And it absolutely makes me infuriated that he could not do that, could not stand up to the pressure, but went along with it, even though he would not lose one dime of retirement pay if he did.
I remember interviewing a guy a few years ago, General Cash, and he was a brigadier general. He was assistant director of operations for NORAD. I interviewed him on radio. Fascinating interview. He said he finally had to retire. He could not get up every morning and look himself in the mirror, put on the uniform, and play this political game that was required to continue. He did that at great sacrifice because, as he described on the radio, achieving that first star is the hardest one. The rest of them come pretty easy if you just keep your nose clean and do what you're told, right?
Don't forget, there have been many general officers who have stood up, and they were purged out as well by the Obama administration. So I don't want to give you the impression that they weren't honorable general officers who were trying to uphold their oath of office. One comes to mind, General Nagata went before Congress and said, it's the ideology that drives this threat that we need to be aware of, and we're not. And
so Obama purges the Pentagon from a lot of the guys that would have helped us, but now they're gone. And then you have the others who see that and they go along to get along and to advance their career instead of being generals in the Pentagon executing the war as they should to win. They become politically correct. They bring in the Muslim Brotherhood chaplains. They bring in the Muslim Brotherhood to consult them. We give eyes and ears onto our special ops as we did in Afghanistan, as Billy and Karen Vaughn have told us went on with their son, Aaron Vaughn, the SEAL Team 6 team that died, 17 of those, 30 Americans altogether in that Chinook helicopter. We let the fox into the hen house. So the good generals are gone. They've been purged. The guys that are there, clearly, many of them have not seen combat, and they are there because they have learned a lesson from seeing who was purged to go along to get along, correct?
Just look at General McNamaster. I can think of no better example of the type of generalship that we have right now in the military.
So we're under siege.
No question about it.
And that's why what we're doing is so important. Because, again, I don't want to sound, self-serving here, but there are not a lot of networks and radio networks and TV stations that will produce programs like this and put it out, are there?
Just look what happened recently to Judge Janine. She had the fortitude to at least question what's going on with Islam and Sharia law by questioning the loyalty of a recently elected Muslim representative to the elected official to the House of Representatives.
From Minnesota, by the way.
And as soon as she did, what did Fox News do? Suspended Judge Janine for 2 weeks. I can't wait to get her back. She has a lot of support out there in the national audience, and I hope she will come back. But again, the message is sent. Islam is protected. Watch what you say, because if you say too much, you're going to be punished. And
what she said about the hijab and Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota, wearing it, was all accurate. 100% accurate.
Absolutely.
And yet it's Islamophobic to say what she did, to speak the truth. She has an unreasonable fear or phobia. There's something not quite right with her in the head, right? That's what they say. And that's what they say about you and I. And so when all these people are purged, or they put off TV and suspended for a while, if not permanently done, suspended or put off, then what happens is the message is sent, and there's a chilling of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And therefore we as Americans are now destroying our own house by our own hand, just as the Muslim Brotherhood explanatory memorandum said they would get us to do in their document in '91, discovered in 2004. And again, folks, this is largely why in June of 2006, I sat down in my office and laid out on paper building a digital technology platform, broadcast network like this for radio and TV, because I knew that the day was coming where we had to be able to have the freedom to say what we wanted, build a network, build a following, build a massive email list, build a large text alert system, and get out the truth. Because I saw this was coming, and I saw the technology was coming, and we were ahead of the curve. When I sat down in my office and planned out this network division in June of 2006, you could barely stream a video for many people. They get a spinning circle. A lot of people still were not on digital high speed, but we knew it was coming. We were one of the first companies to have a Roku channel. Many people didn't even know what Roku was. And now with our distribution through Roku and apps and computer and website, we're reaching millions, millions. Someone called the other day and said, we did some studies on your website. You're crushing many of the conservative websites out there with your bandwidth. You're doing far better than they are as far as your traffic. This is why we built this, folks, with your help, because we knew we needed an alternative to be able to put, as we did yesterday in the studio, former FBI agent Dave Baldwin on, as well as today, Dave Perez. This is so important. And then having Usama Dakdok, Sharam Hady, and Phil Haney, the Vaughns, and the list goes on of people that have TV shows with this network. Because at the end of the day, we can talk about everything that's happening about us being under siege. But the reality is we have to go around the churches largely, the pastors, the military officials, the intelligence community, we the American people now, and the mainstream fake media, we have been forced to go around all of these institutions that have been sieged and be, in many ways, an independent voice speaking truth to the American people. Because when the American people get the truth, we see that many of them are responding. The good news is this is all about education, because this is largely an information operation, a brainwashing operation, propaganda. And the way you refute that is with the truth, correct?
That's correct. Let me ask your viewers to do one thing. Think back to your own pastors, your own church officials, your own rabbi, for example. When is the last time that any of your pastors have warned you about this threat? Pastors and rabbis are supposed to be shepherds, protectors of their flocks. And when's the last time your pastor ever warned you about the genocide that's taking place right now of Christians that are being killed and persecuted throughout the Middle East and Northern Africa? At least asking you to pray for them. When I go out and speak to civic groups, whether it be Act for America groups, or former Tea Party groups, or Republican groups, the overwhelming people in the audience remain silent when I ask to see a show of hands of when their pastor ever spoke out and asked them to pray for people being suffering under the extermination that they're going through. All of these topics ought to be front page, front and center warning shots, letting people know that this threat exists. And pastors are totally silent and oblivious to it. They will not discuss it. They're afraid of it.
We see over in France, where a few years ago they closed down between 100 and 160 mosques because of terrorist attacks. They went in there and they started finding military-grade weapons, and they were shutting down 100 to 160 mosques. People can go online and look at it. Why are they finding military-grade weapons in those mosques over there in France? And is that occurring here, and why?
The Muslim Brotherhood's objectives have mosques in all of our major cities. And the mosques, according to the explanatory memorandum, must be of the same type, the same purpose as the initial mosque that Muhammad established, not in Mecca, but in Medina. It was a military headquarters. It was a logistic headquarters where weapons could be stored, where they could make ready for jihad and conquest, where they could hold prisoners of war, where they could plan for future operations. That was the purpose of the mosque. The Muslim Brotherhood went on to say that the other purpose of mosque is a niche for our prayers, almost as a second thought that mosques serve a religious purpose. But their primary purpose, according to their own documents, is to be an armory, a local armory from which military operations will eventually be performed if they're needed.
What about terrorist training camps? How many of them are in the U.S.?
There are 23 or more. They're located throughout rural America primarily. You can go to the Clarion Intelligence Network for more information about these Muslim of America jihadi camps run by the Jamaat al-Fuqra leader in Pakistan. They have a network of camps throughout the United States, a network of followers, primarily former military or former convicts who have become radicalized in our prison system. And there are also training camps for guerrilla warfare for actual combat. They're armed, they're trained, and they're prepared.
And so while they may not want them to act now as they go for more of a civilizational jihad, they are getting ready so that if they cannot do it through the soft jihad, they'll do it through the process of war.
And that's what I think is that they're preparing for. That eventuality that they may have to use combat. Right now they're very complacent in terms of or allowing the Muslim Brotherhood to do its thing covertly without violence. And they're in lockstep with the Marxists, the cultural Marxists, and the progressive movement to do that. And that's what you see is that form of the axis taking place. But while that's going on, these jihadists are infiltrating our country across the border. These terrorist cells are entering our country. We have ISIS training camps just across the southern border in northern Mexico. It's been well documented by the Department of Homeland Security, but it gets no coverage by the local media. And unfortunately, I cannot imagine why President Trump also isn't warning us about it, because his own administration has certainly this information at their disposal. But we're not being warned about what's coming across the southern border. And don't forget Canada as well. Prime Minister Trudeau is now accepting former ISIS members into Canada. And do you think that they're going to be constrained by a northern border that doesn't exist? They're going to come across that border as well.
What about ISIS training camps in Mexico? Any information on that?
Yes, they exist right across the border in Ciudad Juarez is where one of them existed, and others have been uncovered. Remember, Iran, through Hezbollah, has penetrated deep into South America. It's firmly entrenched down there, and these jihadi fighters are migrating up, have become infiltrated in these caravans, and they're coming across the southern border. It's been well documented. Judicial Watch has run articles and warnings about it, but again, that's not being heeded.
What about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard from Iran? I mean, we're hearing from Peter Pry and others that there are potentially thousands of Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which just is, I mean, ISIS is a drop in the bucket compared to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. And we heard they have potentially thousands of agents sitting here in the U.S. already. What say you?
I haven't heard about the agents of the Revolutionary Guards in the United States, but it wouldn't surprise me. What I have heard is their forces are training in South America, these portions of the Revolutionary Guard. So they're obviously getting ready for something, and now the recent report is that even Russia is sending troops into South America.
Venezuela.
Into Venezuela. So the momentum is starting to occur. The winds of war, if you will, and conflict are blowing, and we need to pay attention to it.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Sharia. We're enforcing Sharia on ourselves, just as they said they would get us to do. But now we're seeing in Germany a patrol car that looks like it is from Turkey. We've showed pictures through Claire Lopez. Well, it looks like a police car, but it's a Turkish police car enforcing Sharia in Germany. And that was a shock to a lot of people. But now we're finding patrol cars of Muslims in New York, and they're being fully embraced by New York. They want it to go all over the city and to be a national model. Now, they say they're going to do that to make sure that Muslims are being kept safe and there's no harassment or hate crimes against them. But my guess is what they're really going to be doing is enforcing Sharia, not only on the Muslim, but the non-Muslim, meaning they're going to come after anyone who's doing a hate crime, speaking truth about Islam, passing out literature, anything else. And then they're going to make sure that the Muslims are staying in line by making sure they're wearing their hijab. So any of the moderate Muslims that they would consider being hypocrites because they're not practicing accordingly, those moderate Muslims who could be killed if they don't get in line, just as could the infidels. These patrol cars really not only are going, I think, to intimidate Americans, but they're going to intimidate the moderate Muslim. You better get on the side of Sharia, correct?
That's right. We have Muslim or Sharia community patrols currently in New York City. There's not any difference between the way their vehicles are painted, colored, and with their logos than the New York City police patrol vehicles themselves. They're almost identical, except they say Sharia Community Patrol on it. Unfortunately, in New York City, there are also Jewish community patrols as well. And so the Muslims have picked up on that, the jihadists have picked up on that, the fundamentalists. If you can do it, we can do it. So that's part of the problem. But these community patrols, and we've had representatives from Georgia in Minneapolis, St. Paul, donning a uniform, self-proclaimed Sharia patrols as well. So it's not an isolated event when they start patrolling city streets to impose their law here.
When we have Muslim Brotherhood working actively as they did with the socialists, the National Socialist Workers' Party of Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, Muslim Brotherhood recruiting some 30,000 Muslims, some Bosnian Muslims to wear the Nazi uniform, the crescent moon and sword, or certainly the sword of Islam with the swastika, as we document in the movie Sabotage. You can watch that first hour for free at sabotagethemovie.com. Then we clearly know that those Muslims were Islamo-Nazis working with Adolf Hitler, giving the Nazi salute. Many of them today are also adhering to social justice, a major tenet of Islam. They are praising Adolf Hitler. Some of them say they want to finish what Adolf Hitler started with wiping out the Jews, killing the Christians. I refer to it often as Islamo-Nazis. What do you think of that term?
Well, I think it's a very accurate term, certainly, because they say the same model playing out. We've been here before. All we have to do is open our eyes and recognize it. But this battle is not going to be won at the federal level. I am absolutely convinced right now that the federal level is totally impotent and has been totally penetrated to such a grave extent that we're not going to win it there. It's going to be won at the local level, recognizing this threat and making sure that local people counter it. By following some of the suggestions that Brannon gave you earlier, that more and more people need to be educated in the true nature of what we're facing. It's being played out right in front of our eyes, and we can't deny it any longer.
So we need to win it at the local and state level. And some states are doing better than others. We reside, David and I reside in Tennessee. You're in Georgia. But Tennessee is doing better than some other states, correct?
Oh, I think so. But All states a lot of states are starting to come around, or many of them are, some of them are not, such as Michigan and Minnesota, in New Jersey as well. In Tennessee, there's a full court press on the Bible Belt to take over. So you've got to be alert for what is happening. When mosques are being constructed where there is no Muslim population, that should be a red flag that you can expect more to come. They are positioning these mosques at key strategic places for a reason, and you just need to think it through.
Well, they want to dominate in the places like the Bible Belt, where people tend to sign up for the military in greater numbers than the rest of the country. Patriotic, Second Amendment folks in the South, in the Bible Belt, if they can penetrate that, intimidate local law enforcement, intimidate local elected officials, and then intimidate state officials and get Sharia laws and diminish our freedom to warn about them, they can then take over what really is probably really the last greatest hope for the nation, which is the South.
That's right. David brought very clear yesterday when he appeared here, and he talked about the review of textbooks, of how our education system has been totally compromised by misinformation, by a revisionist aspect to our history. Just think about how this generation of children view America now because of the propaganda that has been propagated in our textbooks. And unless it's purged out, unless an accurate view of history is reinstated, our children don't stand a chance because they've been totally brainwashed at the behest of social Marxists.
Absolutely. And yesterday on our radio show, we had a lady call in from Mexico talking about how she is an American, educated in America, and she said, I bought the lies of the left. I bought into the brainwashing. I hated America. I hated America so much, I left America and moved to Mexico because I could not live in such a horrible, racist, hateful nation like America. Then some missionaries from Mississippi came into her life in Mexico. She became a believer. She began to be re-educated as to what is the truth, and the truth destroyed the lies. She now is married to a Mexican. She has children. She says now today, as she did on radio, she is a proud American, living in Mexico, but a proud American. And she called in from Mexico to say, everything you're saying about brainwashing and textbooks, I was a victim of it, and I was finally set free by some Christians from America who spoke the truth. You see, my friends, why they hate us, the Islamists and the Marxists? It is largely the capitalist, free market, Christians and conservatives that are their enemy. Of course, the Jews. But they know that we will stand, many of us, with the Jews and the Jewish state. They know that we will put our money where our mouth is. We will start networks like this. We will sponsor and produce and distribute at our expense programs like we have on this network. We will put them out all over the world. They know that we are the ones that are unbrainwashing many people, and they see us as a threat. But we see from the caller yesterday from Mexico that one of the keys is education. Education and the truth destroyed the lies that had taken her captive, spiritual captive. And she called into the program to say, I can say yes and validate what you're saying. And I am the product of one that was brainwashed and then set free with the truth by proud Americans who are also Christians, who came and spoke truth to me in Mexico. Folks, education is the key. Truth is the key to destroying these lies. That's what we brought you tonight. That's why we brought Dave to town, and he sat at this news desk for 4 hours doing 4 one-hour briefings. Now, these are very professionally done. You'll find them on our website at WVWTV.com with all the PowerPoint for you to share with your friends, your family, your local law enforcement, military friends. Get them out all over the world. If CARE is going to shut down sheriff departments and police departments, then we'll put it out this way. This is very important. Thank you, David, for your service to our country in the military, also as a sheriff deputy, and then as chief of police. And now what you're doing now.
You're quite welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, if you appreciate programs like this, remember we are listener supported. It doesn't happen without your support. We don't have money coming from some big, huge foundation, the Rockefellers, George Soros, and all these groups. We don't have some church backing us, a big church or anything. We have $20, $30, $40, $50 a month donations. Some of you are generous and send more. but generally it's the little donations. It adds up. We're listener supported. If you appreciate what we're doing, the stand we're taking, the information and the service that we're providing, WVWfoundation.com to make a tax-deductible contribution. WVWfoundation.com. You can also send a check to our mailing address. You'll find it there on the screen. You can also join our Situation Room, where we archive all of our years of programs. All of our shows are available, mostly all of them, are available for free for a period of time. Then they do roll into our VIP club. SituationRoom.net if you want to join. SituationRoom.net. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. Take care.
Wow. Good evening again, everyone. What a wonderful interview. We have, of course, with us right now, Brannon Howse. Brannon, welcome.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
And congratulations to both of you, David and Brannon, for an extremely well done interview. By the way, I want to give a disclaimer right now. We've got a few text messages. Our rebroadcast, I think, captured a lot of people who had a large audience. They stayed for the entire time. If anyone experienced any kind of technical issue, I want to take responsibility for that. We're pushing a few buttons ourselves here. Sometimes we push them correctly, and sometimes we don't. But I want to make the comment that this entire interview and all the work on the website, David, give the website again where they can go directly to the link, please.
What was that? Say that again, Dick.
I'm asking David, Brannon, would you repeat the website where people can see this and every other interview you're doing?
Thank you. They can do that at WVWTV.com, WVWTV.com. They can also watch on our free app. They want to download our free app. They just go to WVWTV.com/app. They can watch this on our free Roku channel. For details on that, go to WVWTV.com/Roku. If they want to watch it on YouTube, we have it on YouTube. Just type in Brannon Howse, BRANNONHOWSE. They'll find our YouTube channel. With this interview I just did and many others, including one we just released with Chris Gobbets, interviewing former National Security Council member for President Donald Trump for a while, Rich Higgins. So all of this can be found, of course, at our homepage, WVWTV.com. But like I said, we have it on our app, our Roku channel, and then we also have a YouTube channel. We don't put everything up on YouTube, but we do put a lot. We did put this interview on YouTube as well.
So our technology today is to basically take things that are really well done, professional, like this interview, and put them in front of people. We are improving our own quality as we go, and there might have been a slight delay in some of the video, but the message, everyone stayed online. Nobody left. So I want to say congratulations again to both of you. You really got into the heart of the matter. Brannon, I'm just curious. You've interviewed a lot of people. How do you position David and what he's trying to do? Where does David fit in this? We are under siege. You've done a great job of explaining that. When you think of David and his work, and again, thank you for taking on the recording of 4 one-hour training sessions that I understand you've done with David. But just give us, excuse me, where does David's impact on this problem of the siege fit?
Well, let me just say we'll be post-editing those with his beautiful PowerPoint and everything here in the month of May. We've got to get past our Worldview conference coming up the first weekend of May in the Lake of the Ozarks. And then we get past that, we'll be devoting our time to post-editing those 4 presentations by David and getting them there at WVWTV.com for people to, we hope, as we said in the TV broadcast, bring folks into your home, maybe hold a meeting with some of your city officials, police officers, sheriff deputies. If we are going to see that CARE, Muslim Brotherhood / Hamas is going to shut down the training, then let's do the training in our own living rooms. I mean, they can't really stop that. And so we're going to make those available because, again, Dave took the time to come here and film those 4 1 hours. And we'll, again, get those post-edited in the very same quality production you saw tonight's broadcast. And, again, that's a service that the United West and David and then WVW Broadcast Network, all of us kind of partnering together are doing. And I'm seeing more of that, by the way. I'm seeing more groups like ours coming together and being willing to work together in a way to get out the message. And we need to see more conservative groups doing that. And, you know, everybody gets a little credit, everybody gets a little exposure, and we grow together. And that's what we're seeing. As long as we think about how we can help the other guy, it ends up coming back and helping us as well. So everybody should be about helping each other enlarge the audience. And when we do that, and the water rises, all boats rise. David brings a unique opportunity to us as someone to interview because he's a former military guy of 23 years. He's also a former sheriff deputy, and then he's also a former chief of police. If I were to try to find a former chief of police to interview, and I wanted to interview him not only for this broadcast, but excerpts of that will be placed into our next docu-movie entitled Siege, which will be out in August of this summer. And we believe this is going to be one of the most important docu-movies that people could watch in anticipation of the 2020 election. Because if we go back to letting the deep state run our government and we elect a cultural Marxist like Hillary Clinton or someone like that, they will finish up the revolution they started. They were on their way to carrying out a 1948 revolution as they did in Czechoslovakia, where they took a revolution without firing a shot because they had so infiltrated the bureaucracy with communists that they didn't have to fire a shot. Well, Barack Obama about accomplished that in 8 years, and Hillary, I think, could have finished that up. And we got a little pause, a little reprieve. But it won't take long for them to get back in the game full speed with one more control of the House and the White House. So we've got to educate the people, and that's what we do. And that's why David is important to this docu-movie I'm working on, Siege, because if I were to try to find a chief of police that I could interview, where am I going to find that? Now, there may be other former chiefs of police out there, but I'm not aware of them if they are. And are they as articulate and well-trained and educated and well-spoken on the issue as David? I haven't found it. So what he brings to me is what I'm always looking for. Someone with a credible resume and knowledge base that we can use on radio and television and in docu-movies and say, look, this is a former chief of police. Here's former FBI, and we interviewed David Baldovan for that. Here's former Department of Homeland Security officer Phil Haney, who's one of our broadcasters now. Here's former undercover operative Chris Govitz, who infiltrated Hamas undercover. He now has his own TV show with us. We launched last week at WVW TV. Here is former Muslim Sharam Hadian. Here's Egyptian expert on Islam and the Quran and Arabic-speaking Usama Dakdak. Here is former CIA operations officer Claire Lopez, who's an expert on these issues. And here is Dr. Peter Pry, also a former CIA operations officer, former chief of staff for the EMP Congressional Commission. So look at everyone I just lined him up with to say, look at all of these credible people. And David fits that lineup very well, but he does it as a former chief of police. Again, I challenge anyone to find me a former chief of police that is knowledgeable on the issue as David is, that will come on to radio and TV, because some of these guys, they want to sit in the tall grass. They won't get on radio and TV with me.
Well, David is one other characteristic. David is a brave person. David is very brave. And I think the people that you're talking about who won't do this, what it really comes down to is we have a lot of cowards in the country, unfortunately. I wanted to just embellish a little bit, David. One of the things that you've taught us, by the way, I am a student. I've taken David's class all 16 hours 2 times, and I'm grateful for that. One of the subjects that maybe wasn't touched on too much tonight that we try to also bring up in addition to what you did talk about tonight is the notion of what's going to happen to women. You know, even in civilization jihad, women are at risk. So even before the bullets fly, the incremental mentality of male dominance, which you cover so well, David, should give pause to people who care about women and girls. So maybe, David, you could just spend a minute about the potential for crimes against women, just briefly, and just to round out what you've already talked about.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dick, for that lead in, and Brannon, thank you for joining us tonight. There's no question that women are going to be the first group that is targeted by the Islamists. They have a deep, let's say, disrespect for women. Women are considered property under Islamic law. And women who do not follow Sharia law in terms of dress codes are to be punished for their rebellion. And we're seeing that now in Maine. We see it also in St. Paul, where you have large concentrations of Somali Muslims. The sexual assaults, the rapes are increasing. So it's not far-fetched at all to say that this is the tripwire. This is the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. When you see these things happening, it is just going to spread and get worse. So be knowledgeable and stay current of what is happening around you. And just because it's not happening in your neighborhood today doesn't mean it's not going to come knocking at your door very soon, but because it's already here and it's already been amply displayed of what's happened in Europe. The grooming gangs, the Muslim rape gangs have been prying on women for decades now. So it's not going to stop until we take some action to curb it.
Well, Brannon, you mentioned a lot of names that we are we like very much. We follow Philip and Sharam and those people, and it's a tremendous group that you've got, and we are blessed to be able to interact with them as well. Sharam Hadian really shook me up in our interview with him on our radio program when he said, you described the upper house. That's when Sharia folks should behave like they are Sharia. They don't have to hide. They don't have to tell lies. They can be openly Sharia compliant with all their male dominance, etc. Sharam said that people in upper echelons of the Sharia world look at the world and check off countries that are just moved into the upper house. France is in the upper house. Sweden is in the upper house. His comment was that he thinks it's possible that America could be in the upper house of Sharia compliance in 2 to 5 years, which gives us one presidential election and maybe another, and that's it. So when he says 2 to 5 years, he may have said that on your show. What's your reaction, Brannon, to this notion that we are snowballing down the mountain towards this terrible end?
Well, that's exactly why we put out the docu-movie Sabotage. And again, folks can watch one of the 6 hours for free. It's sabotagethemovie.com. Sabotagethemovie.com. They can watch 1 hour of the 6 hours free. They will be shocked at how fast that 1 hour goes. They'll think they were watching it for 15 minutes, and they'll look and it's an hour. Because we deliberately produced a docu-movie that was like watching 24 or some other very intriguing television program, because that's the way Americans are today. So they've set the bar high as far as trying to keep people's attention. And in that movie, Sabotage, that's the point we're making with Sharam Hadian being on the platform before about 1,000 people at our conference in Lake the Ozarks last year. And he has said since, he believes that it's very likely Minnesota and Michigan have already moved to being in the upper house. It's very likely those states have already moved to being in the upper house. Look, they just elected an Attorney General, Keith Ellison, Attorney General, a Muslim Brotherhood guy to Attorney General. Of course, we know they have Ilhan Omar is a U.S. Congresswoman taking his seat. We know what's going on in Michigan and with female genital mutilation. So Michigan and Minnesota are likely already gone. It won't take many more states. Now, the problem is that if it wasn't for the Marxists, the Islamists would never have gotten where they are today. There's not enough of them. So when you add the red-green axis and you add the progressive, socialist, Marxist, however you want to define them, globalist, and then you add in the Marxist, now they make enough of the population to be able to win elections and move us to the upper house in the remaining states. So at the end of the day, this is a Marxist revolution. As I say in the documentary Sabotage, the globalists have let the dogs off the leash, the Islamists. And they're using the Islamists as junkyard dogs to de-Christianize the West, to create chaos. This is the very same thing that Putin, I believe, the communists have done for years. They've used the Islamists. They've trained them. They've funded them, I believe. We have information of that will be in the movie Siege. And we're going to see that the communists, the Marxists, have been behind the Islamists all along, giving them the helping them get to the upper house. Now, the question is who's going to be in charge? And I can tell you right now who's going to be in charge. It's going to be the Marxists because they outnumber the Islamists. But again, if they watch the first hour for free at sabotagethemovie.com, they'll get that. The follow-up, Siege, will be out this summer, is actually subtitled. It's called Siege. It's subtitled, The Clear and Present Danger, Pushing America Towards the Brink of a Neo-Marxist Revolution, Civil War, World War III, and Globalism. Now, again, can you even believe we're having to say that in April of 2019, even with Donald Trump in the White House? But we are still one election away from them completing a neo-Marxist revolution in America, taking your Second Amendment rights, taking your rights with red flag laws, hate crime legislation, blasphemy laws that make you an Islamophobic, fining you for using the wrong, I guess, pronoun when describing someone who's changed their gender. We're talking about fairness doctrine on the radio. We're talking about sustainable development, Agenda 21, now Agenda 2030, that deprives you of your private property. We already are in World War III, according to Peter Pry, when the Russians are attacking our power grid. That is an act of war. And we know we're moving toward globalism and the destruction of our national sovereignty, as now we have also going on an economic war that has already started, as China, well, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are all going after the petrodollar, all going after our American dollar, which is only backed by the fact that it's used as a world reserve currency, thanks to Nixon closing the gold window. So we are at war. There's an economic war. There's a trade war. There is a computer cyber hacking war. Peter Pry, I think, is right when he says in the documentary Siege we're producing, he says we are already in World War III.
Yep.
So we are being sieged. This docu-movie coming out this summer is really going to be the opportunity for the American people to get it in an entertaining, cutting-edge manner with experts like David, because if we lose the next election, I think it's over. This is it. And that's not hyperbole. We've seen it through history. Go and study the revolution of the Czech Republic in 1948. That's the model.
Well, I think we agree 100% with what you just said. A Trumpless America today would be a disaster. A Trumpless America in 2021 will be a disaster. By the way, we will see, and you mentioned the globalists, we're very much aware of the Chamber of Commerce impact and the notion that they will put up Republicans in name only. They will go through a whole campaign. I think somebody announced today from Massachusetts named William Weld. There are people who will, in their own way, try to compromise the election of Donald Trump. It is so important that because he is the closest person to understanding what you know, Brannon, what David knows, he finally is cleaning out the shop as best he can. He's getting more and more informed people on this topic near him. We would be basically, the 2 to 5 year death sentence will happen. In fact, we believe if Donald Trump is not elected. What I would like to do, and I will admit, I'm going to go through some questions. It's going to take me a second or two to read them and position them. So this is not the professional part of the program, folks, but we want to get the questions asked and answered if we can. Okay, so here's a question. Well, actually, here's a quote. Let me find that one. This is what I was talking about. There's a quote about Harry Truman saying, when even one American who has done nothing is forced by fear to shut his mouth and close his mind and shut his mouth, then all Americans are in peril. And you did talk about the blasphemy laws, and just a comment here to throw into the mix. In the state of Michigan, we have an attorney, well, I guess, yeah, we have an attorney general in the state of Michigan. She has established a hate crimes division. So she has a group of people in the attorney general's office who are actively looking at haters, monitoring them, following them, looking to potentially bring charges against hate speech and hate crimes. And of course, she has announced she's following the Southern Poverty Law Center as the definers of truth. That would basically put Sharia Crime Stoppers on that hate list. Unfortunately, and of course, that's a big Southern Poverty Law Center scam. But we would support the notion that Michigan is in the upper house for that reason, for example. I know you've had some experiences with people trying to shut you down, and I'm assuming, by the way, you've made a tremendous transition into the studio, into the world of internet broadcast, they can't shut you down now, but you had some experience in your tours, right?
Yeah, they shut us down in 4 out of 5 cities a year ago right now. That included the Muslim Brotherhood, I believe, CARE, from what we saw on social media, but it was largely being led by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Yep. And a Marxist group known as the Gamaliel Network, which was retooled in the 1980s by Gregory Galuzzo, a Jesuit Marxist who studied under Saul Alinsky and who brought a young Barack Obama to Chicago and taught him community organizing. That's Gregory Galuzzo, who Barack Obama threw his arm around and gave credit for helping him win the Iowa primary and thus going on to win the White House. I talk about that in my book, Marxianity, which is a term I came up with just sitting at my desk one day thinking, you know, all they're doing is merging Marxism with Christianity. It's called Marxianity, and they can get details on that at Marxianity.com. But yeah, they shut us down in 4 out of 5 cities. A group that is a Marxist group doing interfaith dialogue. I mean, just think about that. A Marxist group doing interfaith dialogue. So again, that red-green axis, and they shut us down in 4 out of 5 cities because Chris Gobbets, Shahram Hadian, and John Guandolo, we're all going to be speaking. So we already had radio and TV. I've been doing radio for 25 years or more. We're doing TV. We just expanded our TV audience. I mean, our TV studio, we just made it bigger, added on, and just said, we're just going to concentrate on building our network with more hosts. So yeah, they pushed us through this door, which I was ready to do. I've been doing conferences and hosting them for over 25 years. So I was getting a little tired of it. Plus, that's not the model, really. The model is what we're doing tonight. And the studies show that. This last month, we saw a study where streaming is now beating terrestrial television. So this is the model. But, you know, I just interviewed for an hour today for the docu-movie as well as for a TV show. But for the docu-movie, we'll pull parts of it, of my interview with Diana West, who just wrote Red Thread. And what we were discussing was the Marxianity of James Comey. Mm-hmm. James Comey, who made it all the way to being the FBI director, is quoting Reinhold Niebuhr. Now, I write about Reinhold Niebuhr in my book, Marxianity, because he was a, quote, Christian Marxist, end quote. Also, this is known as liberation theology, and there are other names it flies under as well. But think about that. We had an FBI director who was quoting over and over positively a Christian Marxist, Reinhold Niebuhr, and Comey is calling for redefining love as power, redefining love as social justice, redefining justice and love as redistribution, and included Christians, quote, Christians who were committed to this ideology of Reinhold Niebuhr had to ignore evil and do what had to be done in the name of power to achieve the ultimate justice, which is really social justice, which is the most loving. Now, as I think Diana West hit the nail on the head today, she said the Frankfurt School, which were the cultural Marxists that came to America in about 1933, and I write about them in the book Marxianity, she said Comey was the FBI director of the Frankfurt School. That's the headway the guys are making. We had him, and don't forget, he was the one that let Hillary off the leash. Then we got John Brennan, who voted for Gus Hall, a communist, but he went on to become the head of the CIA. We had at the FBI Comey. Comey, by the way, is giving an FBI Director's Award to a jihadi. You'll see that in my movie Sabotage at sabotagethemovie.com. We have the picture of Robert Mueller giving a jihadi the FBI Director's Award. Then you've got Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS, and you got Bruce and Nellie Orr and their sympathies toward communism. Look, the fifth column deep state, interesting enough, many of them are doing this as supposed Christian Marxist, which is why I had to write the book Marxianity, because that Marxianity has now infiltrated mainstream evangelicalism, and some of the biggest so-called conservative Protestant pastors in America are holding hands with known cultural Marxists who are also doing interfaith dialogue with Muslim Brotherhood. And we are going to watch our country be destroyed by Protestant evangelicalism as well as the liberal branch of Catholicism. And my friend Cliff Kincaid is a Catholic fighting the liberals in the Catholic Church. I'm a Protestant fighting the liberals in the Protestant Church. But we're going to watch as they use education, religion, and media to destroy this country.
Well, David Boris, you're well aware of what Brannon is saying. And David, as you know, we've just finished a webinar series on the enemies within the church. Basically, we have Cliff Kincaid will be in the next episode of that. But the Catholic Church, good news is there is a subset of the Catholics who are on fire. They're so upset with the Jesuit Pope. You mentioned it earlier, Jesuit Chicago. The Jesuits, unfortunately, are leading the charge. And David Boris, when you hear all of this, I'm just curious, you've got questions about what can we do? And I'd like to maybe invite you to give us some thoughts about what people could do, and then we'll ask Brannon the same question. What would you advise people to do? They're hearing this, they're getting upset. What would you advise?
Well, and they need to be upset because this stuff has been going on for so long, and their elected, who we certainly thought were going to be looking after our best interests, have betrayed us. So number one, I say we have to pray about all of this. Number two, recognize this is a spiritual war that we're in. It's all been predicted, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to us. So stay informed, and that's part of the reason we're doing what we're doing tonight and these other webinars and what Brannon does. He has a radio show every day at 1 p.m. Central, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay informed. Number three, if they can, host some of these presentations. As Brannon indicated, I'm more than willing to come to just about any place to talk to small groups, large groups. Doesn't make any difference. I've trained over 1,500 police officers since I started this in 2012, and I'm prepared to. And I know that Brannon is continuing with his movement, with the videos that he is putting out and the people that he interviews. This is a full court press. Challenge your school boards. Take a look at what children are being exposed to. I know a lot of the textbooks now have been removed, that students are being trained online. So you have to be a little bit more aggressive than we used to, is actually show an interest of what children are being presented with. I know that there's a lady on right now from Franklin, Tennessee, Patty Cantor, that she has recently challenged a local school board who was going to talk about white privilege, but because of her efforts and others in her community, that has since been removed from their county school board. So these battles have to be won on an individual basis, fight by fight by fight. But first of all, you have to be aware that there's even a battle going on in your community, that there is something not right, and then stand up against it. And it takes courage to do it, because you're going to be labeled. There's going to be people that are going to come out against you. It's not comfortable. Brannon knows that. I know it from what I experienced last year. Nobody wants to be labeled. But nonetheless, if you go in there with your big pants on and understand that that's what's going to happen, you're going to be called out. So be prepared for it. And that's about what I would tell people now that they have to do. There's obviously some other things that, but if you just stay informed and look locally and fight these battles, just like Patty has done up in Tennessee, and David Baldwin by being on that textbook review committees. This is where the battle has to be fought and won.
Brannon, what can you what would your answer be? What should people focus on right now?
Well, Patty Cantor is a regular listener of ours, and one that we get communication from regularly in our office. So I am very confident that if she didn't know who David was prior to our broadcast, she then, of course, got more information. And it's a perfect example. Here he's quoting someone I know who, I don't think I've ever met Patty, but I know exactly who she is because she communicates with our office regularly. And I know what David's speaking about because she sent communication to us. So what it shows is many of our listeners are listening to you. Your listeners are listening to us. There's a cross-pollination going on. We're all experts in different areas. I'm not an expert on every issue. I bring in experts on the issues like David or Usama or Sharam or Peter Pry, and then I have my area. So we're all specialists, but when we get together as specialists and we work as a team, boy, we can really educate the American people. And that's what we're using our radio and TV and docu-movies for, is to bring the specialists together in their chosen area and let them brief the American people. Because as we talked about during the radio show or the TV show that we just played, the caller from Mexico who had been completely brainwashed to hating America so much she left the country, only to finally be told the truth by missionaries from Mississippi who went to Mexico. And she calls into the program, and she's called in now for a second time. And she is one of us now, and she's on our side, and she's encouraging us. So how did she get turned around and unbrainwashed? Because they brought her the truth. And I hear from friends of mine in the military. I have a friend of mine who's in military intelligence with 600 officers that answer to him, who I speak with routinely and communicate with on almost a daily basis, if not on phone, by email or text. And he has told me that he has seen the atmosphere change from an Obama administration to a Donald Trump administration, where people were afraid to speak truth in the military and intelligence community under Obama. But when Trump came in, and a few months after the thaw, they now feel free to speak the truth. Now look, these are military people, and they have sworn an oath to defend our country from enemies both foreign and domestic. And if people in the intelligence community and the military are going to be intimidated by name calling, then I have to agree with David and say it's time to put on your big boy pants and realize what it is we're fighting for. But what I'm trying to say is, if the average American feels intimidated, you're not alone. Even guys in the military and the intelligence community apparently start to feel intimidated about their position, their image, their reputation, the name calling, or their career. Well, that is how you end up having a minority of people tyrannize and are dictators over the majority. And almost every time that's the case. The majority of the people in a country don't want the Marxism or socialism, but they let a minority boss them around because they succumb to the group consensus and peer pressure. We can't do that. A case study that I'll be presenting on TV soon is 1956 in Hungary, when the students rose up against the communism in Hungary in 1956, and they took to the streets, and then they, I think, got control of a radio station, and they began to make some headway, and were adding numbers. And the more people they added to the streets in the protests, the more would come out, and the more would come out. And pretty soon, this was a big problem for the former Soviet Union of what was happening in Hungary. And people were running into folks in the street, protesting communism, trashing the communists, and they would run into them and think, I thought you were pro-communist. Only to find out they weren't pro-communist. They just went along to get along because they were scared. And then when they felt safety in numbers, they came out and were protesting the communists. And this is what happens in how the communists or Marxists win, or the globalists win. We are the majority. There's more of us that believe this way than them. There's more of us that believe in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and absolute truth, the laws of nature, nature's God. We just cannot begin the process into tyranny, which begins with people being afraid to speak truth. Speak truth, and if they don't like it, they can go pound sand.
Well, I have very little to add to that. I want to thank Brannon and David for sure. Just to bring into the perspective that we've been talking about, we presented in previous episodes the enemies within the Catholic Church, very hard-hitting conversation. There are remnants of people in the Catholic Church who are very upset with the political part of the Catholic Church. We call them the remnant. We had a program on the evangelicals. Again, evangelicals are very upset with the leftist ministers and pastors. And the other night we had our Jewish community, Jewish people talking about the enemies within the Jewish community. The point I'm making is each one of the faiths in America have a remnant. These are people who really, really want to follow the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Judeo-Christian principles that gave us this country. They are afraid. These broadcasts, and certainly everything on Brannon Howse's website, all of these broadcasts, and again, were brought forward by the United West and Tom Trenton. One team, one fight. It's the one team that's going to be made up of these remnants that see each other, the example that you gave. We need to recognize that we're all part of the same program. We want to unite the remnants, Jewish, Catholic, evangelical, make sure that Donald Trump is elected. Otherwise, we run out of runway. And so with that message, again, we'll thank Brannon Howse and David Boris and invite you to join us on Tuesday nights going forward. And I think you're going to find everything you're looking for on Brannon's website and United West together. So one team, one fight. Thank you, gentlemen. And we'll say good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Brannon. Good night.
Thank you, David. Thank you, guys.
Good night.